I survived my high school abuser, only for him to become my son's favorite teacher, and my wife expects me to be grateful. I never imagined I'd have to face him again. Not after everything that happened in high school, not after the trauma and the fear and the long nights of replaying his voice in my head, telling myself I was worthless. I thought I'd escaped, carved out a decent life, built a family that loved me for who I was rather than who I'd been forced to be. I was wrong. My name is Caleb. I'm 39 now, married with a 9-year-old son, Dylan. My wife, Tara, and I live in a modest suburban neighborhood. Our life is pretty ordinary, a small ranch-style house with a neat yard, a rescue dog named Oliver, and a mortgage we can just about manage. I work in IT, troubleshooting other people's technical problems all day, and Tara is a photographer who mostly does portraits of families and couples. We met in our early 20s, thus bonded over shared sarcasm and mutual fascination with travel, and eventually got married. It's not a perfect marriage, no marriage is, but we love each other and usually manage to compromise. Or at least, we did until recently. Dylan, our only child, started 4th grade at the local elementary school this past September. He's a sweet kid, if a bit shy. He loves reading and draws elaborate comics in spiral-bound notebooks, featuring imaginary superheroes and elaborate battles. Tara and I have always tried to encourage his creativity. He's not the kind of kid who's out playing sports every afternoon, but we support him as he is. We signed him up for art club, let him try piano lessons, that kind of thing. We'd been hearing from Dylan about his new teacher for a few weeks, Mr. Anderson, who apparently was the coolest teacher ever. Dylan would come home bubbling with excitement. Mr. Anderson let us act out scenes from a book in class today. Or, Mr. Anderson plays guitar during lunch break. Or, Mr. Anderson says I'm a great artist. This was a pleasant surprise. Dylan's always been anxious around adults, but if he liked Mr. Anderson, who was I to complain? Tara was thrilled. Isn't it great he's finally found a teacher he connects with? She kept saying, her eyes lighting up with that maternal pride. I agreed, if only because a good teacher can make all the difference for a shy kid. I still remember the day I first heard the name in full. Dylan was chatting away, describing something that happened in class, and I was half listening while I fiddled with my phone. He said, "Yeah, Mr. Anderson, Mr. Justin Anderson. He showed us how to do shading with pencils." Something about that name sent a jolt through my spine, but I brushed it off. Anderson isn't exactly rare, I told myself. I never even knew the first name of the guy in high school. I just knew him as Andy or Anders, or sometimes that asshole, to be perfectly blunt. My mind started conjuring up distant memories. An older kid with a smirk, a swirl of fear deep in my stomach. Then I forced them back down. It had to be a coincidence. About 2 weeks later, Dylan brought home a flyer about a parent-teacher event scheduled for the following Monday. Tara had a work obligation, so I was the one who'd go. I told Dylan I'd be there, no problem. I was curious to meet his favorite teacher. That weekend, I kept having these unsettled dreams, ghosts from the past swirling around. I'd grown up in a different town, about an hour away, so the odds of crossing paths with my old tormentor here were low. Still, I felt a simmering anxiety. I tried to bury it, not wanting to alarm Tara or Dylan over what was probably nothing. Monday evening rolled around. I arrived at the school early, parked in the half-full lot, and followed the signs to Dylan's classroom. The hallways smelled like chalk dust and disinfectant, same as any elementary school. I passed colorful murals on the walls, children's artwork pinned to bulletin boards. A few other parents were there, making small talk. I gave polite nods, scanned the room for a face I didn't recognize, and that's when I saw him. He stood behind a small wooden desk, chatting with a couple. He wore pressed khaki pants and a sweater over a button-down shirt. His hair was parted neatly, but I remembered it being messy blonde in high school, perpetually spiked up. He was older, of course, so was I, but there was no mistaking that face. Maybe the grin lines around his mouth looked deeper, maybe his eyes had crow's feet, but I'd have known him anywhere. This was Andrew Anderson, the boy who made my teenage years a waking nightmare. And now, he was here, apparently teaching my son's 4th grade class. My heart hammered so violently I thought I'd choke. I felt hot and cold at the same time, my palms sweating. I wanted to bolt, but then I thought of Dylan, how much he adored this teacher. And maybe, just maybe, This man had changed. People change, right? Maybe it wasn't as bad as my memory insisted. I tried to gather myself, telling myself I was an adult now, that the past couldn't hurt me unless I let it. He finished chatting with the other parents and turned toward me. For a split second, I hoped he wouldn't recognize me, but the moment our eyes met, I saw a flicker of recognition. His mouth twitched as though he were about to say something. Then he forced a polite smile and strode over. "Caleb, right," he said, extending a hand. "Nice to meet you. I'm Mr. Anderson, Dylan's teacher." His voice was deeper than I remembered, more polished, but hearing my name from his mouth made me queasy. I managed to stammer something like, "Yes, hi, nice to meet you," ignoring his outstretched hand. He withdrew it awkwardly, then cleared his throat. "Well, I'm glad you could make it. Dylan's a bright kid, a little shy, but he has a real talent for drawing." The tension in the air was unbearable. I forced myself to look him in the eyes. Part of me wanted to challenge him. "Don't you remember what you did to me?" But the rational part said, there were people around, other parents listening, teachers milling about. This was Dylan's school. I couldn't just cause a scene. Besides, maybe he was expecting me to blow up, and I didn't want to give him the satisfaction. I coughed and said, "He really likes your class. He talks about you all the time." My voice sounded robotic. Anderson nodded, gave a small laugh. "That's great to hear. I do my best to make learning fun, you know?" He studied my face, maybe gauging how I felt about seeing him again. Before he could add anything else, another set of parents walked over, so he turned to greet them. I excused myself, heart pounding. I spotted a row of student work on the wall drawings, essays, small crafts. I stared at them without really seeing. I could feel the panic rising, memories flaring, being shoved into lockers, whispered slurs, stolen belongings, the humiliating pranks. My breath came fast. It was all so long ago, but my body reacted as if it was happening now. I managed to get through the meeting in a haze, responding automatically to polite chit-chat, mostly avoiding Anderson. After about half an hour, the event wrapped up. Parents drifted out, exchanging goodbyes. As I headed for the door, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to find Anderson standing there, expression guarded. "Caleb?" he said softly. "Could I have a moment?" I froze. Everything in me screamed to say no, to walk away. But I was curious. What did he want? I shrugged, so he beckoned for me to follow him a few steps out of earshot from the last parents remaining in the classroom. He folded his arms, took a breath. "Look, I know we went to high school together," he began quietly. "I just wanted to say I hope we can have a fresh start, especially for Dylan's sake." His eyes were searching my face for something. Forgiveness? Understanding? My mind reeled. "A fresh start?" I echoed, my tone sharper than I intended. "Right, because that just erases everything that happened." His face flickered with discomfort. "I'm not saying it erases anything. I was a stupid kid back then. I did things I'm not proud of." He looked down, picking at an imaginary speck on his sweater. "But I've grown up. I've changed." I stared at him, my teeth clenched, wanting to spit out every ounce of hurt that had festered in me since I was 16. But I also remembered Dylan's excited voice. "Mr. Anderson is so cool." So I said, with forced civility, "I'm not here to make trouble. My main concern is my son. If you're a good teacher for him, that's all that matters." Anderson nodded, relief flickering in his eyes. He opened his mouth to say something else, but I walked away, letting the door close behind me. My drive home was a blur. My hands shook on the steering wheel. I blasted the radio to drown out the storm in my head, but the memories screamed louder. I saw a montage of humiliations, him and his buddies cornering me in the hallway, calling me names, the time he dumped half a milkshake over my head in the cafeteria, the locker room fiasco. One particular memory bubbled up. Sophomore year, gym class, Anderson and two of his friends pinning me against a row of lockers, calling me freak and loser, threatening to do worse if I ever ratted on them. It was so visceral that I had to pull over for a moment, my chest tight, tears stinging my eyes in the darkness of the side street. Eventually, I got home. Tara was putting Dylan to bed, so I paced the living room, anxious and uncertain about whether to tell her. When she came downstairs, I must have looked shaken because she asked, "Hey, everything okay? How was the meeting?" I hesitated. "How do you explain that your old high school bully someone who terrorized you was now your son's favorite teacher?" I tried to remain calm and said something vague like, The teacher's someone I know from way back, and I'm just not exactly happy about it. Tara frowned, stepping closer. What do you mean? You know him? Like a friend? She wasn't going to let it go. I sighed and explained, haltingly, that Anderson was an old bully who used to harass me. I didn't give every detail, but enough for her to see how uncomfortable it made me. Tara's reaction wasn't what I expected. She listened, yes, but her immediate response was, "Oh, that was years ago though, right? People change, and Dylan really likes him." I stared at her in disbelief. Tara, I had nightmares about this guy for years. You know I was bullied, how it messed me up. This is the ringleader, the worst of them. Tara looked uneasy, as if not quite sure how to weigh the gravity of my trauma against Dylan's glowing reports about Mr. Anderson. "Finally," she said. "I'm sorry, honey. That must be awful for you, but we can't just pull Dylan out of a class he loves, can we? Maybe he really has changed." I felt the start of a wedge between us, a tension that I couldn't quite articulate. On one level, I got it. She wanted Dylan to thrive, and she assumed that if Mr. Anderson was good to our son, that overshadowed the past. But on another level, I felt betrayed that she didn't instantly take my side, or at least show more empathy for the flood of painful memories. Instead, she seemed almost grateful that Dylan had a caring, energetic teacher, refusing to see how complicated that was for me. Over the next few weeks, I tried to avoid confrontation. I dropped Dylan off at school earlier than usual so I wouldn't run into Anderson, or I let Tara do pickups. But every day, Dylan came home with new stories of Mr. Anderson's awesomeness. "He's teaching us guitar chords," or "He drew my superhero for me, Dad, look." He'd brandish these sketches that Anderson had made. Admittedly, they were pretty good and look up at me with shining eyes. My insides twisted. I wanted to be happy for Dylan, but seeing the name Mr. A scrawled at the bottom of a drawing made me remember all the times Anders left nasty notes taped to my locker. One evening, Dylan said Mr. Anderson had offered after-school tutoring for kids who wanted extra help or wanted to learn more about art. Dylan asked if he could attend once a week. Tara was all for it, exclaiming how wonderful it was that a teacher would volunteer free time. I bit my lip, feeling an irrational wave of jealousy and dread. Anderson, alone with my kid, forging a bond. It made me feel powerless, like he was stepping into my family in ways I couldn't control. But Dylan was so excited, I couldn't bear to say no. Tara tried to reassure me. "Look, sweetie, I know this is tough, but you're letting an old bully keep power over you. If he's changed, maybe this is a chance to bury the hatchet, and if he's not changed, well, we'll figure that out soon enough. But let's give Dylan a shot at this." She meant well, but her words stung. The idea that I was letting him keep power over me felt like an accusation, as if I was weak for being disturbed by the sudden reappearance of my abuser. On the day Dylan started his after-school sessions, I made an excuse to get off work early so I could pick him up. I parked in the school lot and wandered the halls until I found the art room, this big, well-lit space with paintings on the walls, jars of paintbrushes, and neatly stacked supplies. Dylan sat at a table, happily doodling. Anderson stood behind him, offering pointers. Another kid was there too, working on a sculpture. I peered in through the doorway, heart pounding. Anderson glanced up, noticing me. He gave a polite nod, motioning that Dylan was wrapping up. I walked in, trying to keep my face neutral. "Hey, buddy, ready to go?" Dylan grinned, holding up a sketch of a new superhero he'd invented. "Check it out, Dad, Mr. Fry. Anderson showed me how to get the proportions right." I forced a smile. "Looks great, Dylan." Anderson wiped his hands on a rag, then approached. "Your son's got a real gift," he said softly, as if trying to keep the conversation low-key. "He picks up techniques fast. I was thinking he might enjoy some of the after-school art club stuff we do." I nodded stiffly. Then, in a moment of forced politeness, I managed, "Thank you. I appreciate you helping him." Anderson gave a small, almost tentative smile. "Sure, if there's anything else he needs, let me know." As I left, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a window, shoulders tense, jaw clenched. It felt surreal. I was a grown man, father to a bright little boy, yet seeing this teacher reduced me to a frightened teenager. I didn't know how to handle that. Over time, Dylan and Anderson grew closer. Dylan would talk about how Mr. A encouraged him to think outside the box, how he praised Dylan's creativity. He'd mentioned Mr. A telling funny stories about traveling or playing a silly game with the kids. Meanwhile, Tara started chiming in with her own praise. Isn't it wonderful that Dylan finally has a mentor figure who gets his artistic side? She'd say how she was thinking of inviting Mr. Anderson to one of Dylan's upcoming art showcases, a community event for local students. She seemed completely oblivious to how that might tear me up inside. One night, I lost my composure. Tara and I were in the kitchen after Dylan went to bed, discussing weekend plans. She casually mentioned that Mr. Anderson asked if we wanted to volunteer at a field trip. I snapped, my voice louder than intended. Why do you keep acting like this is normal? He bullied me so bad I still have nightmares sometimes. He humiliated me in front of everyone, and now you expect me to be buddy-buddy with him? Tara's eyes widened. Caleb, I'm not saying you have to be his best friend, but he's Dylan's teacher. Our son adores him. Are we supposed to just yank Dylan out of his class and ruin a good thing because of something that happened over 20 years ago? Her words stung. I felt accused of being petty or irrational. I spat back. It wasn't just something that happened. He tormented me daily, physically and mentally. This isn't a small thing, Tara. She threw up her hands. I know it's not small, but he can't hurt you now. You're an adult, and he's apparently changed. You said yourself, he apologized, right? I shook my head, exasperated. He didn't exactly apologize. He just said he was a stupid kid and hoped for a fresh start. That's hardly the same as taking responsibility for all the damage he caused. Tara took a deep breath. Look, I get it, you're upset. But you can't let this overshadow Dylan's happiness. He's finally thriving in school. Try to see that bigger picture, please. The conversation ended in a stalemate. We went to bed, turned off the lights in silence. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, torn between guilt for wanting to protect my son from the man who had once traumatized me and guilt for not wanting to stand in Dylan's way. I recalled the times I begged my parents to step in and protect me from the bullying, but they never really understood how bad it was. Now I was in their position, more or less, except the abuser had changed roles. He was no longer the tormentor, but the benevolent teacher. I wasn't sure how to proceed. A couple of months passed. I mostly kept my distance. Dylan continued to shine under Anderson's guidance, bringing home impressive artwork and better grades in all subjects. One evening, Tara announced that the school was hosting a teacher appreciation night where parents and students could come to celebrate the educators. Dylan was excited to attend, hoping to show off some of his new drawings. Tara said, "We should both go. It would mean a lot to Dylan." I hesitated, but Dylan's hopeful face swayed me. Okay, I agreed, for Dylan's sake. The night of the event, the school's cafeteria was transformed into a makeshift banquet hall. Tables of food lined the walls, and there was a little stage set up for short speeches. Teachers milled about, some wearing bright name tags or sashes. Parents wandered, balancing paper plates of snacks. Kids darted around, squealing with excitement. Dylan tugged my hand, leading me to the art corner, where some of the teachers from the arts department were gathered, including Anderson. Anderson was chatting with another teacher, but as soon as he saw Dylan, he broke into a broad smile. "There's my star artist," he said warmly, giving Dylan a playful high five. Dylan beamed. Tara moved forward, greeting Anderson in a friendly, almost familiar way. "Thanks so much for all you've done for Dylan," she said. "You've really helped him come out of his shell." Anderson nodded modestly. "He's the one doing the hard work. I'm just pointing him in the right direction." I hovered a couple steps behind, uncertain where I fit. Tara gestured me closer. "You remember Caleb?" she said to Anderson, with a bit too much brightness in her voice, like she was trying to smooth the tension. Anderson nodded, his smile dimming slightly. "Of course. How are you, Caleb?" I mustered a polite, "Fine." That was all I could manage. The event proceeded with short speeches from the principal, a few older students, and some parents. Dylan wandered off to find a friend. I stood near Tara, half listening, my attention drifting whenever Anderson caught my eye across the room. He seemed subdued, occasionally glancing my way, as if he was assessing whether I was going to cause a scene. I tried not to look at him, focusing instead on the words of the principal who thanked the teachers for their dedication. Then came a moment where they invited any parent to speak briefly about a teacher who made a difference. Much to my shock, Dylan reappeared at my side, tugging my sleeve. "Dad, can you go up and say something about Mr. Anderson?" he asked, his eyes big and hopeful. My stomach dropped. Before I could reply, Tara chimed in, "Oh, sweetie, maybe Daddy doesn't." But Dylan insisted, "Please, Dad, you write so well. You can talk about how he's helped me draw better and how nice he is." My face must have been a tableau of panic. I glanced at Tara, who looked torn, then at Anderson, who stood a few feet away, overhearing. He wore a guarded expression. If I refused, I'd disappoint Dylan publicly. If I agreed, I'd have to stand up there and praise the man who made my teenage years a living hell. I swallowed hard, kneeling to Dylan's level. "Buddy, maybe Mom wants to do it," I tried. But Dylan pouted. "Mom always does the talking. I want you to do it." He looked so earnest. My heart twisted. "Okay," I whispered. "I'll do it." Dylan grinned, hugging me. Then Tara gave my hand a squeeze, her eyes reflecting gratitude and concern. When my turn came, I stood up and walked to the small podium. My heart hammered so loudly I could barely think. I scanned the crowd. Parents, teachers, kids, the principal. Then my eyes landed on Anderson, standing near the front. He looked pale. I cleared my throat, the microphone too close, squeaking feedback. My voice cracked. Hi, I'm Caleb Reed, and my son Dylan is in Mr. Anderson's class." I paused, the magnitude of what I was doing choking me. "Dylan is a shy kid," I continued haltingly, "but he's also creative. Before this year, he didn't have much confidence in his art or in himself, really. But thanks to Mr. Anderson, he's really blossomed. He's excited to go to school, excited to learn, excited to draw. He comes home talking about all the encouragement and feedback he gets. It's made a huge difference." My voice wavered. I felt tears pricking the corners of my eyes. Not because I was so moved by Anderson's kindness, but because the situation was surreal and painful. And I forced myself to continue. "We're grateful for that. As a parent, it means the world to see your kid happy and thriving. So thank you, Mr. Anderson, for caring about Dylan, for being so supportive. It's made all the difference." I abruptly ended there, stepping away from the mic, ignoring the polite applause. My hands shook as I returned to my seat. Tara reached out, lightly touching my back. I avoided Anderson's gaze. After the event, parents and teachers mingled, but I slipped away, telling Tara and Dylan I needed some air. I found a bench outside by the school's flagpole, the evening air chilly against my flushed skin. Part of me felt strangely nauseous, as if I'd betrayed my younger self by standing up there praising the man who had inflicted so much misery. Another part felt relief that I'd done it for Dylan, that I hadn't let my child's sense of safety be tarnished by my old grudge. Or was it even a grudge? It felt bigger than that, trauma, maybe, or old wounds that never healed. A moment later, footsteps approached. I turned to see Anderson walking over, hands shoved in his coat pockets. My first instinct was to stand and walk away, but I stayed, too tired to flee. "That was a nice speech," he said quietly, stopping a few feet away. "Thank you. I know it couldn't have been easy." I let out a bitter laugh. "No, it wasn't." He cleared his throat. "Look, Caleb, I've wanted to say this for a while. I'm sorry. I'm really, truly sorry for all the crap I did in high school. I was an insecure idiot, desperate to fit in with the jocks, and I targeted people who didn't fit that mold. It's not an excuse, just an explanation. I hated myself for a long time afterward. I tried to change. I went to college, decided to become a teacher because I realized how much kids can be shaped for better or worse by their peers, by the adults around them. I wanted to do better. Be better." He exhaled, his breath visible in the cool night air. "When I saw you at the open house, I panicked. I thought, oh my God, he's going to hate me. He's going to make sure I never get to teach his kid. I wouldn't blame you if you did, but you haven't done that, and I'm grateful. I know I can't change the past, but I promise I'm not the same person." Silence fell. I stared at the ground, tears stinging my eyes. "Do you have any idea how bad it was for me?" I asked softly. "I never told anyone, really. I was ashamed. You made me feel worthless." My voice cracked. Anderson sank onto the bench beside me, leaving a respectful gap. "I know. I can imagine, and I'm sorry," he repeated, voice thick. "If there's anything I can do to make amends, anything, just let me know." I swallowed, not sure how to respond. Could anything fix those years of suffering? But then I pictured Dylan, how happy he was in Anderson's class. "Just keep being good to my son," I managed finally. "Don't hurt him. Don't let him become a victim or a bully himself. Anderson nodded solemnly. I won't. I'd never. I promise you. We sat there in awkward quiet. Eventually I stood up, hands jammed in my pockets. I need to go find my family, I said, voice still unsteady. Anderson nodded, rising too. Of course. Take care. Then he paused. Caleb, if you ever want to talk more, I'm here. No pressure. I gave him a short nod, then walked away, mind swirling. That night, I recounted the conversation to Tara. She listened, stroking my arm soothingly. Sounds like he's genuinely remorseful, she said. I know it doesn't erase the pain you went through, but maybe it's a step toward healing? I shrugged. I couldn't quite find words for how complicated it felt. Yes, he apologized. Yes, he seemed genuine. But part of me was still that terrified teenager, suspicious that this was some trick. Or maybe I just couldn't let go of the anger. I guess so, I finally said, not sounding convinced. Over the following weeks, I tried to process the swirl of emotions. It was easier said than done. Tara suggested I talk to a therapist, but I hesitated. I'd done therapy in college for anxiety, but I'd never delved fully into the bullying. Maybe it was time. Meanwhile, Dylan continued to thrive in Anderson's class, bringing home great grades, creative projects, a newfound confidence. My chest ached with conflicting feelings whenever Dylan praised Mr. A. I was proud of Dylan, but resentful that Anderson got to be a hero in his eyes. One afternoon, the phone rang while I was at work. I saw it was the school's number, so I answered immediately. It was the principal's assistant, telling me Dylan had a fall at recess and twisted his ankle. They wanted me or Tara to come pick him up and take him for a checkup. Tara was on a shoot, so I left work, heart pounding with parental worry. When I arrived at the nurse's office, Dylan was sitting on a cot, sniffing back tears, his ankle propped on a pillow. Anderson stood beside him, hand gently on Dylan's shoulder. Dad, Dylan cried, relieved. I fell off the monkey bars. I quickly assessed Dylan. He seemed mostly okay, just shaken up. The nurse said it was a mild sprain, but recommended an x-ray to be sure. Anderson knelt by Dylan, speaking softly. You're going to be fine, buddy. Just take it easy on that foot for a while, okay? Dylan nodded, wincing. Then Anderson rose, turning to me. I'm sorry this happened. He was climbing, lost his grip. I rushed over to help him. He was pretty scared. I swallowed, seeing genuine concern in Anderson's eyes. Thanks, I murmured. I appreciate you looking out for him. He gave a slight nod, stepping back so I could help Dylan. I cradled Dylan's shoulders, guiding him to stand. Anderson offered to carry Dylan's backpack, walking with us down the hallway. It was surreal seeing my old abuser doing such a protective, fatherly thing for my kid. Once we reached the exit, he handed me Dylan's bag, gave a gentle pat on Dylan's head, and wished us well. In the car, Dylan said, Mr. A was so cool, Dad. He piggybacked me all the way to the nurse's office. I glanced at my son in the rearview mirror. He did? Dylan nodded. Yeah. He said I was brave. He stayed with me until you came. My throat tightened. The man who used to push me around the halls was now literally carrying my son, calling him brave. My emotions were a tangled knot. We got the ankle checked. No break, just a mild sprain. Tara joined us at the clinic, relieved it wasn't worse. Later that evening, while Dylan rested with an ice pack, Tara took me aside and said, So I heard Mr. Anderson helped Dylan a lot today. That's good, right? She looked at me hopefully, as if wanting to gauge my reaction. I sighed, nodding. Yeah, it's good. I'm glad he was there. She placed a hand on my arm. Maybe this is a sign you can trust him with Dylan. I didn't reply, just gave a non-committal shrug. Yet that incident did shift something in me. It's not that I forgave everything at once, but seeing Anderson care for my son in a moment of need forced me to acknowledge that he wasn't the same impulsive bully from the past. I started to wonder if I should talk to him more, find some closure. A week later, I bit the bullet and visited the school in the afternoon, hoping to catch Anderson after classes. I found him in his classroom, grading papers. He looked surprised but not unhappy to see me. Hey, Caleb, everything okay with Dylan? I nodded. He's fine, thanks. I came to talk if you're not too busy. Anderson set aside the papers. Not busy at all. Take a seat. I sat in one of the child-sized desks, feeling awkward, my knees nearly hitting the underside. Anderson moved a chair over and sat across from me. I took a moment, gathering courage. You said before if I wanted to talk more. He nodded gently, waiting. I exhaled. I guess I want to understand why. Why you targeted me so viciously. I was never a threat to you, never did anything to provoke you. Why me? Anderson frowned, guilt shadowing his face. I've spent years asking myself that. It's not something I'm proud of. I guess you were different, quieter, shy. I saw how you sometimes liked books and art rather than sports. And well, I was a messed up teenager, desperate for approval from the jock crowd. They teased you, and I took it further, wanting to be top dog. It's sick, I know. I singled you out because you represented everything I was afraid of in myself. Sensitivity, creativity, being an outsider. I was scared if I didn't prove I was tough, they'd turn on me too. But that doesn't excuse what I did. I felt tears burning behind my eyes as he spoke. Hearing him admit that I was singled out for being quiet and creative twisted the knife. I'd spent years wondering what I'd done wrong. And now it boiled down to his fear and insecurity. Do you even remember half the stuff you did? I asked, my voice trembling. Like the time you locked me in a supply closet after school and I missed the bus? Or when you and your buddies wrote slurs on my locker in permanent marker? He closed his eyes, pained. I remember enough. Some memories are hazy, but I know we did awful things. I'm so sorry. If I could go back and undo it, I would. I clenched my fists, trying to contain the surge of anger. You can't undo it, I choked out. That's the problem. I spent years feeling worthless, hating going to school, wishing I could vanish, and you just get to move on? He rubbed his forehead. I know. I don't expect forgiveness. I've tried to atone in my own way, teaching, supporting kids, especially the quiet ones, but I can't change the past. All I can do is be better now for Dylan, for every kid who walks into this classroom. He looked at me, eyes sincere. If there's anything I can do to make your life easier, I will. I mean that. Tears slipped down my cheeks. I tried to wipe them away discreetly, but he saw. He stayed silent, letting me process. Finally, I whispered, "It's not fair." He nodded. "It's not." Another long silence. Then I stood up, clearing my throat. "Thanks for talking. I just needed to say those things." He rose as well, nodding slowly. "Anytime you need to vent or ask questions, I'm here," he said quietly, "and I won't hold it against you if you still hate me." His voice cracked a bit. I hesitated, then murmured, "I don't know what I feel yet." With that, I left, heart heavy but oddly lighter at the same time. At least I'd confronted him, told him some of the pain he caused. That evening, Tara asked how my day was, and I told her I'd gone to see Anderson. She brightened. "Really? How did it go?" I explained the conversation, how he apologized again, and how it felt. Tara's eyes softened with empathy. She wrapped her arms around me. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. "That took courage." I melted into her embrace, feeling relief that she supported me, even if she didn't fully grasp the depth of my pain. Over the next few weeks, a fragile sort of truce formed between me and Anderson. I still felt uneasy around him, but the raw hatred dimmed. Sometimes at drop-off or pick-up, I'd see him in the hallway and we'd exchange a polite nod. Dylan's enthusiasm for school remained high. He'd excitedly show me new drawings or mention how Mr. A praised his progress. I started to see how Anderson might genuinely be a good teacher. The irony wasn't lost on me that the very qualities he once mocked in me, sensitivity, love for creativity, were now the ones he was nurturing in my son. Then came the bombshell. Dylan was chosen to participate in a district-wide art contest, one that Mr. Anderson helped organize. If he placed well, he'd get a small scholarship for future arts camp. Dylan was thrilled. Tara was ecstatic. I tried to be supportive, though a part of me still churned at how closely Dylan and Anderson worked on the project. They stayed after school sometimes, finalizing the piece. Dylan would submit a mixed media collage with a superhero theme. I wrestled with my complicated feelings in private, not wanting to rain on Dylan's parade. The night of the contest arrived. It was held in a big community center downtown, with entries from kids across the district, all displayed in a gallery-like setting. I drove us there, me, Tara, and Dylan chatting nervously about the event. Dylan was giddy with excitement, bouncing in his seat. When we arrived, the parking lot was jammed. We finally found a spot, then walked inside, greeted by a swirl of parents, teachers, and excited students. We spotted Anderson near the front, directing kids to their designated display areas. He waved us over, showing Dylan where his piece was hung. "Looks great, buddy," Anderson enthused, ruffling Dylan's hair. "Judges will be walking around soon, so let's keep our fingers crossed." Dylan beamed. Tara took pictures, proud mom style. I stood slightly to the side, watching the swirl of activity. My heart clutched when I saw how Dylan looked at Anderson with admiration, almost hero worship. Would he still feel that way if he knew the man's past? After a while, the official part of the event began. A panel of judges, local artists, and educators spoke about the importance of creativity in education. Then they walked around, scoring the pieces. Everyone milled about, nerves high. Anderson drifted between his students' displays, offering encouragement. Once or twice, he caught my eye and gave me a tentative smile, which I returned with a slight nod. Finally, the judges announced the winners. Dylan placed third in his age group, which was a huge accomplishment given there were dozens of entries. He was called up on stage, trembling with excitement, to receive a small trophy and a certificate. Tara and I applauded wildly, my heart bursting with pride. Anderson stood off to the side, clapping enthusiastically. When Dylan came down, he threw his arms around me and Tara, grinning from ear to ear. "Congratulations, buddy," I murmured, my throat tight with emotion. Then he turned to Anderson, eyes shining. "Thank you so much, Mr. A." He ran to him and gave him a quick hug, something Dylan rarely did with adults who weren't family. Anderson looked stunned for a second, then gently patted Dylan's back, smiling broadly. That moment was both beautiful and painful. I saw how Dylan was forging a relationship with the man who had once tormented me, but it was a healthy, positive relationship. Anderson was doing for Dylan what no one had done for me at that age, nurturing his confidence instead of tearing it down. After the awards, the crowd scattered to admire the artwork again. Tara suggested we celebrate by grabbing ice cream. Dylan agreed enthusiastically, but then he asked if Mr. Anderson could come too. Tara looked at me uncertainly. I felt a surge of anxiety, but seeing Dylan's hopeful face made me pause. "Do you mind, Dad, please?" Dylan pleaded. Anderson overheard, raising his hands in a polite refusal. "Oh, that's kind, but I don't want to intrude on your family time." Dylan's face fell. Tara glanced at me for direction. My heart thundered. I knew this was the moment I could either keep my distance or let Anderson in, if only a little. I looked at Dylan, so happy and proud of his artwork, wanting to share that triumph with his teacher. Finally, I took a breath and turned to Anderson. "You're not intruding. If you'd like to join, you're welcome." Anderson's eyes flicked to me, searching. Then he nodded slowly. "Sure, thank you." We headed to a local ice cream parlor, the four of us. Dylan rattled on about the contest, the pieces he liked, how he wanted to do more art projects. Tara was engaged, asking questions. Anderson chimed in with little anecdotes about Dylan in class, praising his progress. I mostly listened, feeling like an outsider in this conversation, but also strangely relieved that it wasn't the disaster I feared. Anderson didn't overshadow me. He didn't try to bond with Tara in a way that excluded me. He was respectful, occasionally glancing in my direction to see if I was okay. After finishing our cones, we stepped outside. It was a chilly evening, stars peeking through the suburban glow. Dylan was tired, but still riding the high of his achievement. Tara offered to take Dylan to the car, leaving me and Anderson standing on the sidewalk. The tension felt thick in the crisp air. Anderson cleared his throat. "Thanks for inviting me. I know this must be weird for you. I appreciate it." I nodded, rubbing my hands together against the cold. "Dylan wanted you there. He's got a big heart." Anderson smiled softly. "He does, and a lot of talent." We stood in silence for a moment, the distant hum of traffic in the background. Then Anderson said, "I meant what I said. I know I can never undo the past, but I want you to know that I admire you for how you've dealt with everything, for being a good father to Dylan. Even after all I did, you've still allowed me into his life. That takes a lot of strength and forgiveness." I swallowed hard. "I'm not sure I've forgiven you yet," I admitted quietly, "but I see you're good for Dylan, and that's what matters to me." Anderson nodded. "I understand, and I'll keep trying to earn your trust." We parted ways with a tentative handshake. It was the first time I'd willingly touched him since our high school days. His grip was warm, not threatening, and my heart pounded with the significance of the moment. In the car ride home, Dylan dozed off in the back seat, cradling his trophy. Tara kept glancing at me, a question in her eyes. "You okay?" she finally asked. I exhaled, still reeling. "Yeah," I whispered. "I think so." She reached over, squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you." I let the warmth of that gesture wash over me. Weeks turned into months. Dylan's ankle healed fully. School continued smoothly. Anderson remained a fixture in Dylan's life, his teacher, mentor, occasional after-school tutor. My nightmares lessened. I started seeing a therapist at Tara's gentle urging to talk about my bullying trauma. I discovered how deeply it had shaped my self-esteem. Confronting Anderson in the present, seeing him as a changed man, was confusing and painful, but also oddly healing. Sometimes the memories still flared up, but the raw edges were softening. Tara noticed the difference. "You seem calmer," she remarked one evening. "Lighter." I shrugged, half smiling. "Maybe confronting your demons can do that. Doesn't make it all go away, but it's a start." She hugged me, relief in her eyes. One day near the end of the school year, Dylan came home with a big grin. "Mr. A got Teacher of the Year for our district," he announced. "They're having a little ceremony at the school. Can we go?" Tara and I exchanged glances. My stomach lurched. Teacher of the Year for the man who once made me feel like garbage. But again, Dylan's excitement was undeniable. I forced a smile. "Sure, buddy. We'll be there." The ceremony was a modest affair in the school auditorium. Various district officials praised Anderson's innovative teaching methods, his kindness, his dedication to students. Several children, Dylan included, got up to say a few words about how Mr. A inspired them. My emotions whipsawed. Pride for my son, resentment for the years of pain, grudging respect for how far Anderson had come. Afterward, while people mingled, Dylan asked Anderson to sign his program. Anderson obliged with a flourish, writing a little note. "Keep creating. Dylan, your imagination is limitless, Mr. A." Dylan beamed. Tara was about to shepherd Dylan away when Anderson approached me carefully. "Hey, thanks for coming," he said. "It means a lot to me that your family is here." I nodded, forcing a smile. Then he lowered his voice. "I know this is bittersweet for you. If you ever want me to step back, I understand." I considered that. Did I want him to step back from Dylan's life? Part of me still longed to run from the complicated feelings, but I shook my head. "No," I said. "Dylan deserves the best teacher he can have. And that's apparently you." A small laugh escaped me, tinged with irony. Anderson looked relieved and grateful. Over the summer, Dylan moved on to 5th grade, no longer in Anderson's class. I breathed a small sigh of relief, thinking I'd have to see him less. But Dylan still occasionally dropped by his old classroom to show off a new drawing or chat about art. Anderson also invited Dylan to a short summer art workshop he was running, which Dylan happily attended once a week. I ended up dropping Dylan off a few times, and sometimes I'd stick around to watch from the back. The kids painted or drew, their faces alight with creativity. Anderson guided them gently, praising effort as much as skill. I glimpsed the teacher he had become, the person he was trying to be, the fatherly figure he never had when he was a troubled teen. At the end of one of those summer sessions, Anderson pulled me aside while Dylan gathered his stuff. I'm moving to a new school next semester," he said. "A bigger middle school in the city. It's a great opportunity, and they have a really strong arts program." I nodded, surprised. "Congratulations," I managed. "I'm sure they'll be lucky to have you." He smiled wistfully. "Thanks. I'll miss this place, though, especially students like Dylan. If you guys ever need anything or want to visit, I'll be around." That news stirred unexpected sadness in me. I realized that some part of me had begun to accept him as Dylan's mentor, even if it was complicated. Now he was leaving, and our odd, tension-filled journey was nearing its end. The last day of the workshop, Dylan gave Anderson a handmade thank you card with a drawing of them both holding paintbrushes. Anderson looked genuinely touched, hugging Dylan and wishing him all the best. I hovered, feeling an odd pang. Anderson caught my eye, and we exchanged a small, bittersweet smile. A week later, Tara informed me that Anderson's new school was hosting an open house, and he'd invited Dylan to come see the new art room. Dylan was eager to go, excited about the possibility of advanced art classes in the future. Tara couldn't make it, so she asked if I'd take him. I hesitated, but I agreed. So on a warm August evening, Dylan and I drove to the new school, an impressive building with wide hallways and modern facilities. We found Anderson in the art wing, setting up supplies. He greeted Dylan with a big grin, showing him around. The place was massive compared to the old elementary classroom rows of easels, a kiln for pottery, shelves of paint and brushes. Dylan's eyes were huge, enthralled. Anderson chatted about how the middle schoolers here were encouraged to tackle bigger projects, murals, even digital art. Dylan was enthralled, peppering him with questions. After about half an hour, Dylan wandered off to explore the rest of the open house, eyeing a display of student sculptures in the hallway. Anderson and I were left alone again in a hush of turpentine and fresh paint. "Thanks for bringing him," Anderson said softly. "It's good to see him so excited." I nodded, studying the shelves of supplies. "He's a great kid, and well, I appreciate that you helped him find his passion." The words felt significant to say aloud. Anderson stepped closer, cautious. "I'm grateful you gave me the chance," he said. "I know I put you through hell. It means more than I can say that you didn't let that stop Dylan from having a good experience." I nodded, heart heavy. "I still have nightmares sometimes about high school," I admitted quietly. "But they're less frequent now. Talking to you, seeing the changes in you, maybe it's helping me heal." He looked at me, eyes serious. "I hope so. If you ever need to talk more or just want to yell at me or anything, I'm still here." I managed a half smile. "Thanks. I might take you up on the yelling part someday." He laughed, relieved. We stood for a moment in that quiet understanding, bridging a gap that once felt unbridgeable. Eventually, we found Dylan, who was chatting with another teacher about the pottery wheel. I signaled it was time to go. Before we left, Anderson patted Dylan's shoulder. "Keep drawing, okay? And don't forget to show me your sketchbook next time we meet." Dylan nodded eagerly. As we turned to leave, Anderson and I locked eyes. He gave a respectful nod, and I returned it. It felt like a silent acknowledgement. We can't change the past, but maybe we can forge a better future. In the car, Dylan rattled on about how cool Mr. A's new school was, how maybe he wanted to go there one day. I listened with a mixture of pride and acceptance. Tara was waiting for us at home, eager to hear Dylan's account. After he finished his excited recap, Tara asked me how it was. I shrugged lightly. It's a nice place." She smiled, looking at me with something like relief and admiration. That night, after Dylan went to bed, Tara and I sat together on the couch. She leaned against my shoulder. "Remember when I told you maybe you should be grateful he's in Dylan's life?" She asked softly. I recalled that moment, how furious and betrayed I felt by her words. Now it felt different. "I do," I said, voice low. Tara shifted to face me. "I didn't mean to dismiss your pain back then. I was just trying to focus on Dylan. But looking at it now, do you see anything to be, I don't know, thankful for?" I thought about it, memories swirling. The torment in high school, the re-encounter as adults, the complicated apology, the sincere care Anderson showed my son. "I guess," I began slowly, "I'm grateful that my son had a teacher who truly saw him, nurtured his talents. I'm grateful that maybe this man found a way to redeem himself, even if it doesn't erase what he did to me. And in a strange way, I'm grateful for the chance to confront my past, face it head on." Tara smiled, tears welling in her eyes. She leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to my cheek. "I'm proud of you, and Dylan's going to be an amazing artist." I closed my eyes, exhaling. "Yeah," I murmured, "he really is." There were no perfect endings to this story. My trauma wouldn't vanish overnight, and forgiveness would remain a winding path. But for the first time, I felt a cautious sense of peace. I had survived my high school abuser, only for him to become my son's favorite teacher. It seemed like a cosmic joke at first, but maybe it was an unexpected second chance for him to atone, for me to heal, and for Dylan to flourish. I still wouldn't say I was grateful for what happened in high school, but perhaps I could be grateful for the person I'd become despite it, and for the father I was able to be to my son. As the months went on, Dylan continued to draw, filling sketchbooks with vibrant characters and stories. Sometimes he'd show me or Tara, and occasionally he'd mention emailing Mr. Sig A with a new piece he was proud of. Anderson always replied with supportive feedback. Each time Dylan told me about it, my heart squeezed with lingering discomfort, but also a strange warmth, knowing that I wasn't letting my past stop Dylan from shining. In the end, what started as a nightmare confrontation with old trauma ended in an uneasy but hopeful détente. I learned that people can change, even the worst bullies, though it doesn't negate the pain they caused. I also learned that letting go of anger isn't about ignoring what happened. It's about refusing to let it define who you are. And if, along the way, my son got to have the mentor I never had, maybe that's a victory worth embracing, no matter how complicated it feels. So yes, I survived my high school abuser only to face him again as my son's beloved teacher. And I discovered that sometimes life throws you the very thing you fear, not to break you, but to challenge you to grow. I won't lie and say it was easy, but watching Dylan become the confident, creative kid he is today, I can't deny there's something almost poetic in how it turned out. Maybe that's the closest thing to grateful I'll ever be. And maybe that's enough.